Hey everyone, my name is Wedge, and today we are looking at the rest of the red cards in Theros spoiled over the weekend. Also, keep in mind for any card that was individually spoiled beforehand, you can check out our spoiler series in the description below. The first card we're looking at is Arena Athlete, 1 colorless and 1 red for a 2/1. Whenever you cast a spell that targets him, target creature an opponent controls can't block this turn. This is very in flavor for red. Forcing opponents out of combat is something that red relies on sometimes to get those extra points of damage in. 2/1 for 2 isn't great, but his heroic ability is nice for an aggressive red deck that can trigger it pretty often. He's basically a repeatable goblin shortcutter. Good for limited, better options for standard. Also, let me just point out, this was the guy who was hyped up for so long when we saw the pack designs. They made him all mysterious and used the art in a glorified manner. I expected something better. Wizards. Messing with me on the daily. Borderland Minotaur is 2 colorless and 2 red for a 4/3 vanilla creature. As far as vanilla goes, he isn't terrible. 4 power can take a lot down with it, and 2 red helps towards devotion. He's a fine creature for limited, but nothing that would force you into a color. Boulderfall is 8 mana for an instant that deals 5 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures or players. Let's look at some other red cards that are 8 mana. Udvara Hellkite, Bogarden Hellkite, and Obliterate, just to name a few. What I'm trying to show you is that this card is really expensive for 5 damage and literally nothing else. Too expensive. Way too expensive. Even if you could maybe get a 2 or 3 for 1 out of it, you can't guarantee 8 mana so easily. Coordinated Assault is one of my favorite red cards spoiled. For 1 red mana at instant speed, up to 2 target creatures each get +1/+0 and gain first strike until end of turn. This card is an amazing heroic enabler and will definitely see play in red aggressive heroic decks. It's cheap, it gives a relevant ability, and the +1 makes said ability even more effective. This is a slam dunk heroic enabler, and pretty good even if you don't have heroic creatures. Great card for both limited and standard, triggering heroic all day and killing everything. So good. Deathbellow Raider is a 2 mana 2/3 man-cow bear bowl. He attacks each turn if able, in true classic Minotaur fashion. They never really know when to stop attacking. If you pay 2 colorless and 1 black, you can regenerate him. The ability is fine because chances are he will die over and over again, if you bring him back. The problem is, this mana investment is pretty large over the long term. A 2/3 for 2 is pretty enticing, but he will die so quickly, you won't be able to enjoy it unless you have a super aggressive deck that doesn't care at all about his berserking. If that's the case, you can get away with playing him in limited. Demolish returns once again, 4 mana for a sorcery speed spell that destroys target artifact or land. These types of cards don't often see play because they are usually really expensive and are always at sorcery speed. It's just too much to invest to kill 1 land or an artifact when so much better artifact removal exists. Pretty unplayable, sadly. Dragon Mantle is a 1 red mana enchant creature aura. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Enchanted creature has the ability to pay 1 red mana to get +1/+0 until end of turn. This card is a fantastic heroic enabler, and I could see this seeing standard play just like Coordinated Assault. It wouldn't see play just because of the fire breathing, but it would see play because of the card advantage and how cheap it is. Being able to draw a card with a red spell at 1 mana and trigger a heroic ability, this card is exactly what red wants all of the time. One of the better commons. Ill-Tempered Cyclops is a grumpy 4 mana 3/3 trampler. For 6 mana, you can make him monstrous, granting him 3 +1/+1 counters. This card isn't bad for limited. He's another creature and can add something more later in the game. 6 mana is a lot early on, but when it gets later and you run out of cards to play because you're a red deck, getting a 6/6 trampler seems okay. Not the most amazing card, but certainly playable as a draft pick later in the pack. I really want to love Labyrinth Champion, but 4 mana for a 2/2 is eh. His heroic trigger, however, is really cool. Whenever you cast a spell that targets him, he deals 2 damage to target creature or player. This guy could go in that nutty, perfrose young pyromancer gutter snipe deck. I really like his ability, and even though his cost is a bit high, I think it's good enough to play with the right enablers in both limited and potentially standard if that ridiculous perfrose deck sees play. Even just in limited though, he does a lot. Target him once and he shocks something. Seems pretty decent, especially with Red's efficient auras and other heroic enablers. Speaking of which, Messenger Speed is a 1 mana enchant creature aura. Enchanted creature has trample and haste. I want to immediately like this card because it's a 1 mana cost heroic enabler. The problem is that we have gotten some really good early game enablers this past weekend, and I think this card might just be a little outclassed. When you compare it directly to the Mantle, it just doesn't hold up to the fire breathing and card draw. The trample and haste aren't bad, it just has a lot more competition than I expected. Minotaur Cleaver is another guy that enjoys hitting things. A 3 mana 2/2 haste creature, when he enters the battlefield he gets +2/+0 until end of turn. 3 mana for a 4/2 for a turn can be okay if your opponent's board is either empty or if you want to force a trade. He is nice for taking things down with him, but after that first turn he becomes pretty mediocre. So if you're going to play him, make sure there's a reason to cast him, because once he loses that +2, he becomes a pretty bad mana investment. Portent of Betrayal is a 4 mana sorcery. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature, it gains haste until end of turn, and you scry 1. This is a more expensive active treason with scry attached to it. It's fine for limited play, and some cute red decks will probably sideboard a few of these in standard, because red deck wins always has a hilarious sideboard. It's probably worth considering though, that original flavor active treason is still in standard. Priest of Erois is a 1 mana 1/1. You can pay 3 colorless and 1 white to sacrifice him and destroy target enchantment. 1 mana 1/1s are nice to have in limited because they provide immediate board presence and can sometimes make your opponent tilt a little if you make the first play before them. The ability to sack him and destroy an enchantment isn't actually half bad. It is a bit expensive, but when your opponent sees this ability, they will change the way they play if they have enchantments in their deck. Not the best card for limited by any means, but it can be a decent sideboard against enchantment-heavy strategies, which we're bound to see a lot of. Rage of Perfrose is a 5 mana sorcery. It deals 4 damage to target creature and it can't be regenerated this turn, then you scry 1. Sorcery speed really hurts this guy for me. It seems Wizards is really trying to force you into difficult decisions with the amount of sorcery speed cards they're printing in Theros. As an instant, I would play this card all day in limited. At sorcery speed, it's pretty difficult to justify unless you really don't have other removal or are short some cards. Satyrrambler is a 2 mana 2/1 trampler. Not a whole lot to say about this guy. He doesn't have the toughness of a bear, but you can expect that with red. Trample will only really come into play if he gets buffed up by some auras, but you wouldn't want to use them on him anyway because you want to save them for your heroic triggers. He's a creature I would play just to have another 2-drop in my deck, but I wouldn't think twice about cutting him if I had too many playable cards. Spark Jolt is a 1 red mana instant that deals 1 damage to target creature or player and scries 1. This is fine. It's a burn spell, which is always good. It's an instant, which is great. It scries, which is pretty cool. And while it's only 1 damage, it's 1 mana. It'll kill a bunch of 1-drops and some 2-drops. In addition, you can just ping your opponents to scry 1, or even ping your own creatures to enable heroic if you have to. The card is fine for limited. Titan Strength is another 1 mana cost instant. Target creature gets +3/+1 until end of turn, then scry 1. This is another pretty good heroic enabler. I can see this getting play in an aggressive standard deck for sure. Possibly even in standard. It's basically a scrying rubabout Maka. The scry is super nice, and +3 is pretty big for 1 mana. Giving this to a Fable hero would make it a 6/4 double striker for a turn. That would hurt a lot. This is a great combat trick. The last red card from Theros is Wild Celebrants. 3 colorless and 2 red for a 5/3. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact. The ability is okay. Artifacts are less prominent than most other card types, even when including the god's weapons. The 5/3 body for 5 isn't the best, but 5 power can take a lot down with it. Most of the time, this will just be a huge defender or a beater, and that's okay. Not a first pick, but if you need to curve out, this isn't the worst choice. That's it for red cards in Theros. Which cards do you think were the best of the rest? I always love reading what you guys have to say. As always, subscribe below for the latest and most reliable spoiler information you could ever need. This is the Mana Source, I'm Wedge, thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.